On June the 22nd, 1941, 3 million German soldiers cross the Soviet border before dawn. They move along a front stretching nearly 1,800 miles from the Baltic coast in the north to the edge of the Black Sea in the south. By the end of the first day, nearly 1,800 Soviet aircraft have been destroyed, most of them still on the ground, lined up in neat rows exactly where German reconnaissance had mapped them weeks before. By December, 6 months into the war, the Red Army has lost somewhere between 4 and 5 million men, killed, wounded, or captured. No military force in modern history had absorbed losses like that and survived. And yet they won. 4 years later, Soviet soldiers are standing in the ruins of Berlin. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people in the Second World War, more than any nation in history on either side. The United States lost 418,000, Britain lost 450,000, France lost 567,000. Take every Allied country's military and civilian dead combined, add them all together, and the Soviet total is still larger. So how does a country lose that many people and still win the war? And why did winning cost that much? The answer starts not in June 1941, but 4 years earlier. In the spring of 1937, Stalin turns on his own army. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky is, at this point, the most capable military mind the Soviet Union has. He studied German combined arms methods firsthand during the period of secret cooperation between the two countries in the 1920s. He understands how armor, infantry, and air power work together at speed and depth. His ideas are controversial inside the Soviet military establishment, but they are the right ideas. The Germans are developing almost identical doctrine at the same moment. In 1940, they will use it to destroy the French army in 6 weeks. In 1941, they will use it against the Soviet Union. But Tukhachevsky never gets to test his ideas against Germany. In June 1937, he is arrested, tried in secret, convicted on the basis of confessions beaten out of him, and shot. The execution takes place the same night as the verdict. His co-defendants die with him. What follows is one of the most self-destructive acts any government has ever committed against its own military. 3 of the 5 Soviet marshals are executed. 13 of 15 army commanders are gone. 50 of 57 corps commanders are removed. 154 of 186 division commanders are killed or arrested. In total, approximately 35,000 officers are arrested across 1937 and 1938 alone. The men who replace them are not ready. A colonel who commanded a regiment 18 months ago now finds himself in charge of an army of 100,000 men. Some of them will eventually become capable. None of them carry the institutional knowledge that was just shot in the basements of the Lubyanka. But something harder to measure goes with those officers. After 1937, no Soviet officer tells his superiors what is actually happening if what is happening is bad news. An honest report about equipment failures, training gaps, or tactical weaknesses carries real personal risk. The safer choice is always to tell your superior what he wants to hear. The superior does the same thing to the officer above him. By the time information reaches Stalin, the Red Army has become a machine optimized for telling its leader that everything is fine. On June the 22nd, 1941, everything is not fine. The German army crosses the border at 3:15 in the morning, and the Soviet command structure begins to collapse almost immediately. The Germans spent 4 years developing and refining mechanized combined arms warfare in actual combat, testing it in Poland in 1939 and in France in 1940. They bring that experience to the Eastern Front, along with more than 3,000 tanks and close to 3,000 aircraft, organized into coordinated strike groups that operate at a speed Soviet commanders have no framework to process. When a German armored column punches through a gap in Soviet lines and drives 30 miles in a single day, the Soviet formations on either side often do not know for hours. By the time an order to respond arrives through Moscow, the situation has already changed twice. German junior officers have the authority and training to make decisions without waiting for permission. Soviet officers who act without orders face the prospect of being accused of unauthorized action, which in Stalin's army is not a minor infraction. So they wait for orders, and the Germans keep moving. By the end of the first day, the Luftwaffe has destroyed nearly 1,800 Soviet aircraft, most of them on the ground. Soviet pilots who manage to get airborne find themselves badly outnumbered and outfought. Within a week, the Soviet Air Force in the western military districts has effectively ceased to exist as a combat force. On the ground, the scale of the disaster is harder to absorb. At Bialystok and then Minsk, within the first 2 weeks, German armored forces complete the encirclement of 2 entire Soviet army groups. Over 300,000 soldiers are captured. The equipment of an entire front simply ceases to exist. German commanders write in their diaries that they have destroyed more Soviet tanks in this single encirclement than the Wehrmacht deployed for the entire invasion. Stalin's response to all of this is silence. For the critical first days after June the 22nd, while generals in the field are calling Moscow in desperate need of authorization to retreat, to move reserves, to do anything, Stalin is essentially unreachable. The man who micromanaged every aspect of Soviet political and military life, who signed death warrants over breakfast, withdraws from command at the moment his country needs him most. Some historians believe he is in psychological collapse. Others argue he is calculating, waiting to see how events develop before committing. What the documents show clearly is that in the hours when decisions made the difference between organized retreat and annihilation, those decisions are not being made. When Stalin does reassert control, his instinct is not to adapt. It is to find someone to blame. General Dmitry Pavlov, the commander of the Western Front, is recalled to Moscow, arrested, tried and shot on July 22, 1941, exactly 1 month after the invasion began. His subordinates go with him. The message to every remaining Soviet commander is clear. The price of failure is execution. But what this actually produces is not better decisions. It produces officers who are more afraid of Moscow than of the Germans, and who therefore make choices based on what Stalin wants to hear rather than what the battlefield requires. The Germans take Minsk, then Smolensk, then Kiev. The encirclement at Kiev in September 1941 is still considered the largest single battlefield encirclement in the history of modern warfare. German forces from Army Group Center swing south, while Army Group South pushes north. The pincers close east of the Ukrainian capital. The entire Soviet Southwest Front is trapped inside. Soviet commanders inside the pocket request permission to break out while breakout is still possible. Stalin refuses. He orders the garrison to hold. Colonel General Mikhail Kirponos, the front commander, is killed trying to break out, exactly as his men had been trying to do before Moscow said no. Somewhere between 450,000 and 665,000 Soviet soldiers are killed, captured, or go missing in the Kiev pocket. The range in the figures reflects the fact that the Soviet government spent decades making the exact number as difficult to establish as possible. But the catastrophe of 1941 is not only a story of German capability and Soviet disorganization. It is also a story of what happens when a government decides that certain categories of human behavior are more dangerous than the enemy. In August 1941, Stalin issues Order 270. He has it read aloud to every unit in the Red Army. Any soldier who surrenders to the enemy is a traitor to the motherland. Officers who are captured rather than fighting to the death will be shot upon recovery. Their families at home lose their ration cards, their state benefits, their housing. Enlisted men who surrender will have their families registered as families of traitors. One of the soldiers captured in the summer of 1941 is Lieutenant Yakov Jugashvili, an artillery officer taken during the encirclement fighting near Smolensk in July 1941. His name is not well known outside the Soviet leadership, but his father is. Yakov is Joseph Stalin's son. Stalin learns of the capture. His reported response, according to multiple people present, is that he has no son who is a prisoner of war. He has Yakov's wife arrested. When the Germans offer to exchange Yakov for German Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus after Stalingrad, Stalin's reply is reported as, "I will not trade a marshal for a lieutenant." Yakov dies in Sachsenhausen concentration camp in April 1943. His father never attempts to negotiate his release. If Stalin applies Order 270 to his own son, its practical effect on ordinary soldiers requires no imagination. But Order 270 is the beginning, not the end. By the summer of 1942, German forces are pushing south through the Soviet Union towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus oil fields. The military situation is desperate enough that Stalin issues an order that will become one of the most studied military directives in the history of the Second World War, Order 227. It is issued July 28, 1942. Inside the Red Army, it is known by the slogan, "Not one step back." The order formalizes something that had existed in partial form since 1941, blocking detachments. These are units of security troops positioned directly behind Soviet frontline soldiers, armed with standing orders to shoot anyone who retreats without written authorization from their commanding officer. A Soviet soldier named Nikolai Krasov, whose memoirs are published after the fall of the Soviet Union, describes watching a blocking detachment execute 3 men from his regiment who retreat from a German tank attack without orders. The men have no ammunition left. They have been fighting for 48 hours without sleep. The tanks hitting their position are T-34s the Germans captured from the Soviets in earlier battles and turned around. Krasov writes that the men who shoot his comrades are wearing the same uniform as him. Between German machine guns ahead and Soviet security troops behind, the men in the front lines have no safe direction. Russian military archives, declassified after 1991, put the total number of extrajudicial executions across the war at somewhere between 130,000 and 158,000, with blocking detachments responsible for a significant portion. At Stalingrad alone, NKVD records show over 140,000 soldiers detained by blocking units during the battle, with thousands shot or sentenced to penal battalions. The penal battalions are the third instrument. The Strafbat are formed from soldiers convicted of cowardice, desertion, self-inflicted wounds, or any number of infractions the military justice system can attach to a man's record when it needs bodies for certain assignments. Soldiers in the Strafbat clear minefields on foot, lead the first assault wave against prepared German machine gun positions, and hold sections of line that are specifically targeted for the next German attack. The official doctrine says they can redeem themselves by shedding blood in service of the motherland. Between 1942 and 1945, more than 422,000 Red Army personnel are sentenced to penal battalions by courts-martial. Roughly half are killed or fatally wounded. None of this is hidden from the soldiers it applies to. Order 270 is read aloud to every unit. Order 227 is communicated to every soldier in the army by word of mouth on Stalin's explicit instruction because he does not want it printed. The Strafbat are a visible institution. The men at the front know the blocking detachments are behind them. They know what the blocking detachments are for. And yet the war continues. The men keep fighting. Not because the system gives them a choice, but because something in them refuses to stop. That refusal is what Germany cannot account for, and it is what turns the war around. The war turns at Stalingrad on the Volga River in the winter of 1942. By August of that year, the German Sixth Army under Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus has fought its way to the outskirts of a city on the Volga that has become, for both Stalin and Hitler, something larger than its military value. For Hitler, the city bears Stalin's name, and the propaganda significance of taking it has begun to override the strategic logic of the campaign. For Stalin, losing a city that bears his name is simply unacceptable. Both men pour resources into a battle that neither is thinking about clearly. The fighting inside Stalingrad is unlike anything that has occurred on the Eastern Front to this point. The Germans have spent 3 years fighting in open terrain where their combined arms methods give them every advantage. The rubble of Stalingrad removes those advantages entirely. There is no room for tanks to maneuver. Artillery cannot concentrate its fire effectively without hitting German positions. There are no flanks to turn. There is only the next building, the next floor, the next staircase. General Vasily Chuikov commands the Soviet 62nd Army inside the city. His method is to keep his forces as close to the German lines as possible, close enough that German air support cannot be called without hitting German troops. His men call it hugging the enemy. The Germans call the whole nightmare Rattenkrieg, the war of the rats. Individual soldiers become known by name inside Stalingrad in ways that rarely happen in conventional warfare. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and a small group of soldiers hold a single apartment building on Penzenskaya Street for 58 consecutive days against repeated German attacks, turning it into a fortified position that German commanders eventually route their advances around. Pavlov's house becomes a symbol of the defense of the city. It still stands. But while the Germans exhaust themselves inside Stalingrad, something is being assembled outside it. Marshal Georgy Zhukov has been planning Operation Uranus in secret since September. The target is not the German 6th Army inside the city. The target is the Romanian forces holding the exposed flanks on either side of it. The Romanians lack the armor and anti-tank weapons to stop a Soviet mechanized breakthrough. They are the weak points in a German line that has extended itself too far and too thin, chasing a city that keeps not falling. On November the 19th, 1942, 2 Soviet army groups strike simultaneously, north and south of Stalingrad. The Romanian formations on the flanks collapse within days. By November 22nd, the 2 Soviet pincers link up at the town of Kalach, 60 miles west of Stalingrad. The entire German 6th Army, more than 300,000 men, is encircled. Paulus immediately understands what has happened and requests permission from Hitler to break out while he still has the fuel and the ammunition to attempt it. Hitler refuses. He declares Stalingrad a fortress and orders the 6th Army to hold its position. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein organizes a relief column that fights its way to within 40 miles of the encirclement before being stopped by Soviet counterattacks. Paulus does not attempt to fight his way out to meet it. He is following orders. By January 1943, what remains of the 6th Army is starving. The Luftwaffe airlift that was supposed to supply 300,000 men has delivered a fraction of what they need. Soldiers are eating the horses, men are dying of cold and disease faster than the Soviets are killing them. On January the 31st, Paulus surrenders. The same day Hitler promotes him to Field Marshal, a promotion that carries the unspoken implication that no German officer of that rank has ever surrendered. He gives himself up anyway. On February 2nd, the last German resistance in the Stalingrad pocket ends. Approximately 91,000 men walk into Soviet captivity. Fewer than 6,000 of them ever return to Germany. The rest die in Soviet prisoner of war camps from the same combination of cold, starvation, and deliberate neglect that the Germans had inflicted on Soviet prisoners 2 years before. The symmetry is exact and intentional. Stalingrad does not end the war. 2.5 more years of fighting remain, but it ends Germany's ability to win it. From November 1942 forward, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front shifts to the Soviet Union and does not shift back. What makes that shift possible is not just the victory at Stalingrad, it is what has been happening east of the Ural Mountains since the autumn of 1941. When German forces drive toward Moscow in the fall of 1941, Soviet engineers begin dismantling entire factories. They load the machinery onto rail cars and ship it east, beyond the reach of German bombers, into the Ural Mountains and western Siberia. Workers ride east with the equipment. They arrive at locations where there are no buildings. They reassemble machines in the open air and in temperatures that fall to 30 and 40 degrees below zero, building walls around equipment that is already running. Some of them die of cold before the factories reach full production, but the tanks keep coming. By 1943, Soviet industrial output exceeds Germany's in every weapons category that matters on the Eastern Front. The T-34 tank is not the finest tank in the war. The German Tiger and Panther are individually superior machines, but there are never enough of them. The Soviet Union is producing T-34s in quantities Germany cannot match. Against 100 adequate tanks, an outstanding tank wins. Against 1,000 adequate tanks, it eventually runs out of ammunition. By 1944, the Red Army that launches Operation Barbarossa against German Army Group Center is capable of military operations that exceed anything the remaining German forces can mount in response. Bagration destroys Army Group Center in roughly 2 months, inflicting on Germany a defeat larger than Stalingrad in terms of forces destroyed. The Red Army that enters Berlin in May 1945 bears almost no resemblance in capability, confidence, or competence to the one that collapsed in the summer of 1941. It has learned everything the hard way, at a cost measured in millions of lives. So why did the Soviet Union lose 27 million people to win the war? The answer requires separating two things that the Soviet government spent decades combining into one narrative, because separating them produces a conclusion that makes Moscow uncomfortable. The first part is Germany. The Wehrmacht in 1941 was the most capable military force in the world, demonstrated in combat, not on paper. Its officers had experience Soviet commanders lacked. Its tactics were refined by 2 years of successful warfare. It had momentum, initiative, and the enormous advantage of choosing when and where to strike. Against this force, defending territory the size of the continental United States, with an army that had just been decapitated by political purges, any nation suffers catastrophic losses. Some substantial portion of the 27 million, most serious historians working from the post-Soviet archives estimate 12 to 16 million, belongs to this category. These people die because Germany is capable, determined, and waging a war of deliberate extermination. The Commissar order, issued before Barbarossa begins, instructs German forces to shoot Soviet political officers on capture. More than 3.5 million Soviet prisoners die in German captivity from starvation and deliberate neglect. What Germany does in the Soviet Union is among the greatest crimes of the 20th century. That part of the accounting belongs entirely to Berlin, but there is a second part. The purge of 1937 and 1938 is not something Germany does to the Soviet Union. Stalin does it himself 4 years before the war against his own best officers. Military historians who have studied the opening months of Barbarossa in detail argue, with substantial evidence from the archives, that a Red Army with Tukhachevsky's generation of commanders intact does not collapse as completely in 1941 as it did. The encirclements at Minsk and Kiev are not inevitable. They require a specific combination of German operational skill and Soviet command incapacity. And Soviet command incapacity in 1941 is a direct consequence of what happens in the basements of the Lubyanka in 1937 and 1938. That belongs to Moscow. Order 270 is not something Germany imposes on the Soviet military. Stalin writes it, signs it, and has it read aloud to every unit in the Red Army. When men who might have broken out of encirclements and returned to Soviet lines to fight again stay in place instead because surrender means their families lose their homes and their ration cards, that is a Soviet policy decision killing Soviet soldiers. That belongs to Moscow. The blocking detachments are not a German invention. They are an NKVD institution, sanctioned at the highest levels of the Soviet government, maintained in operation until 1944, responsible for a documented portion of the deaths from 130,000 to 158,000 that the Red Army carries out on its own soldiers across the war. That belongs to Moscow. The Strafbat are not a military necessity. They are a deliberate system for classifying categories of human beings as expendable and assigning them accordingly. The 422,000 men sentenced to penal battalions were not sent there because the military situation required it. They were sent there because the Soviet state decided their lives were an appropriate price for discipline and political control. That belongs to Moscow. The total of deaths attributable specifically to these choices, rather than to German military action, cannot be established with precision. The relevant records were classified for decades, and some are still not fully open. Historians who have worked with the post-Soviet archives give estimates ranging from several 100,000 to several million. The honest position is that the number is not zero, and it is not small. The Soviet Union wins the Second World War. It wins because its people, ordinary men and women who had survived collectivization and the purges and the famine, absorb losses that would have ended the cohesion of any other nation and keep fighting. It wins because its industrial capacity, rebuilt in conditions of almost unimaginable hardship east of the Urals, eventually outproduces Germany in everything that matters. It wins because its generals learn, through 3 years of catastrophic failure and eventual mastery, how to fight the kind of war Germany had been fighting since 1939. And it wins in the final accounting because it is willing to pay a price in human life that Germany cannot sustain on its end. Whether that price had to be that high is the question the Soviet government never asked in public, and Russia still finds difficult to ask today. The purges were a choice. Order 270 was a choice. The blocking detachments were a choice. The Strafbat were a choice. A different government facing the same German military in June 1941 still suffers enormous losses. The military reality of Barbarossa does not offer easy alternatives, but a different government does not execute its best officers 4 years before the war begins. It does not shoot men who retreat from positions that cannot be held. It does not build an institutional system for spending human beings it has decided are already lost. 27 million people lost, more than any nation in history. Now we know their story. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, watch the next video above.